Welcome back to another episode of The Loco Fit Show, where we redefine what healthy means to you. I'm your host, Lauren Conlin, and today I'm joined by our team mental health consultant, Rick, and we're going to talk about, this is kind of an interesting topic, but your experience as a therapist with cannabis, not personally. That's not a wrong intro.
Recommend low lights.
Yeah. This is my
Kenny
favorite
G
strain.
on the radio.
Oh my God, Kenny G. Wow, that would be your choice. Okay.
Some candle.
So your experience working with clients and how cannabis potentially, we're going to be talking about some of the negative effects primarily, because obviously there's a lot of positive effects. There's a really big push for a lot of the positives, and I am a big proponent of using cannabis in a productive and healthy way for you. But quite like any substance, there can be misuse. I don't want to use the word abuse because obviously there can be abuse of any kind of substance, but there can often be a misabuse. And that's really where you want to touch on mostly, like using it in a way that you are not really addressing things and maybe just kind of pushing them away.
Correct.
And I think that it's looked at so differently now because obviously there was a really big negative stigmatization of, cannabis in general. And then now there's been this really, really big resurgence, explosion, right? Which I think is great. I think having more access to this and having more access to regulated THC is incredibly important. However, like anything, there's downsides, right? And I think in the hands of the wrong individuals, it could be more detrimental. So let's talk about it really from like the therapy side and where you see maybe some of the misabuse. And again, this is not a podcast that is demonizing cannabis whatsoever. Like I am somebody who will use THC semi-regularly, very much enjoy it, but it's quite like anything. And I think that sometimes now, kind of like psychedelics, right? Like psychedelics are amazing. There are so many positives to them. But the fact that some people are just kind of like willy-nilly saying like, yeah, everybody should take them. Like, hold up. Not everybody is probably in the headspace to do this. And particularly in certain doses, right? The dose is going to be everything. If you're using a little bit of THC, it's very different than consistently using a very large dose every single day to avoid, your problems. Yeah. So let's get into that.
Yeah. So first, let me start off. I'm not going to shit on marijuana here. It is okay to use. You guys are fine. It's kind of one of those my body, my choice kind of things for me. To each person, their own. I don't have a problem with it from a moral perspective. But let's kind of have an honest conversation about what it is. It is a mood-altering substance. And first and foremost, I think it's important to recognize that aspect of it. I'm not judging it. If people want to smoke weed, go smoke weed. Have fun with it. There's ways to do things responsibly, right? Like don't smoke weed and then go drive a car. Same thing. I would advise people don't drink and drive. So there's boundaries and parameters to know and to understand.
Well, that's, I think, where this big kind of like, there's been this shift, right? Where obviously I think everybody knows that alcohol is not good for you, right? And I would say that there's a lot of detrimental behaviors with alcohol and stuff like abuse. But people are like, well, alcohol is so bad for you, so just smoke weed. And you're like, okay, maybe. But also, like, are we going to have a conversation about how much? You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of like anything. Like, if you're having a glass of wine, that's very different than saying, like, I had 12 beers and 4 shots and then I drove home. Like, both of those are ingesting alcohol, right? So it's like, we can't just say, like, oh, this has no problems.
Yeah. I always enjoy when people start having that conversation where they're like, oh, I don't like, alcohol is bad for you, but marijuana is great for you. Because I love when I run, like, some of my substance groups. Right. And I would always see like the alcoholics would be there and they would be like, yeah, but we're not potheads. And then like the pot people would be like, yeah, but we don't do meth. And the meth people are like, yeah, but we don't do coke. And the coke people are like, yeah, but we don't do heroin. And the heroin people are like, we don't do LSD. You know what I mean? And it's like, so everybody has this way of kind of making themselves feel righteous in their choice. And
you have worked in those groups.
Absolutely.
So you have a lot of experience. It's not just, like you have a first-hand
No, this is years of treatment as a substance abuse counselor. And so, the other thing I also want to kind of clear up too, or that I would like to address my perspective on it is, we hear the terms like gateway drugs a lot, right? And I think for years, marijuana was dinged as a gateway drug. And it made sense for the time. Like when I was in high school, marijuana was still a class 3 controlled substance, which was like where heroin and LSD were in that category, and marijuana when I was in high school. So this is all relatively new in terms of changing what it means, what marijuana means. And I think there's without a doubt in my mind, absolute medicinal benefit for marijuana for a variety of illnesses and ailments. And so it absolutely has its place within the medical community. It has its place as a form of treatment or an ancillary form of treatment to other things. So by no way, shape, or form do I want to see anything happen to the production, use, and prescription of marijuana as a potential treatment for people who need it. In fact, I'm glad it's being decriminalized. I'm glad that most states are starting to turn their policies around in terms of medicinal use. I still think Florida is medicinal, not recreational, correct? Yeah.
Correct.
There's a handful of states that have medicinal and recreational. California, Colorado, places like that.
Yeah, I think it's Nevada, Colorado, and California, from what I know. I would imagine Oregon's probably on that list too.
Yeah.
Because they've decriminalized basically everything.
But my approach and what I've come to understand is once you venture down the path of taking any mood altering substance, that in and of itself, all drugs are gateway drugs to other drugs. Like very few people just go, I've never done anything before, but I'm going to drink today, and then enjoy drinking and then never try marijuana or never try mushrooms or never try coke, right? Most people at some point try something else. You could make the argument that a cigarette leads to drinking, right? And drinking leads to other drugs and substances. And so I've always hated the idea that marijuana is seen as a gateway drug when I think like, look, if you're going to do any drug, it certainly opens you up to the possibility of doing other drugs. It doesn't matter what the drug is. So this whole like, oh, marijuana is a gateway drug. It's like bullshit. Alcohol is a gateway drug. Cocaine's a gateway drug to some other drug. You know what I mean? It just, the logic falls short with me, especially when I've seen those patterns not exist in real life.
Do you think that was just part of like the
scare tactic to avoid
time because maybe people in high school had more access to weed than they did like heroin? I don't know. I'm just trying to imagine like the public service announcement in terms of like, this is a gateway drug, be scared of it, right? Like it's going to melt your brain, like whatever the hell they used to say. So was
this
it like
is your brain on drugs?
Yeah, that like was
the DARE campaign.
Was that part of like, I don't know. I don't know why they would have picked on that, you know, because it's like there were so many other things to like.
They didn't test it. Like marijuana was big in the 70s because of the, the hippies and everybody used to smoke it. And I grew up in the 80s, so I was a child. I wasn't exposed to it. None of my family really smoked, but certainly when the 2000s hit, things changed. You started seeing like adults going in the garage and smoking weed, and it became much more socially acceptable. I think now, even in this state, you can carry a certain amount of marijuana on you, and it's not a criminal offense.
Yeah.
So it's changed, and I'm grateful for that change. But I think in the past it was just because it was in the same category as heroin and LSD. So why would you not?
I just feel like it was a funny one to pick on.
Having an anti-drug campaign, well, they would, because it was the leaf, and then they would have the pills, and then they would have the bottle and the pipe, and it was really nice to just put that big circle with the red X through.
They're like, what looks the best for the graphic? That's the gateway drug. That's the gateway drug.
Yeah. So from that perspective, I think it had a bad reputation, and it's slowly starting to come back.
That's a really good point, though, that like anything is a gateway. Because once you are somebody who is personality-wise open to different experiences and different compounds, you're probably going to be open to a lot of things. And then your like knowledge and information of like, maybe I shouldn't do this because of these reasons. You know what I mean? I understand regulation to a point, right? Because obviously you don't want this to be in the hands of the wrong person, especially children, right? Like that's understandably why there are restrictions on certain things, and
not just in children, but because of not just because they're small or naive, because their brains and
their
bodies
brains are
still
developing.
Yeah.
Like like I'm somebody who I think almost everything should be legal. Like just as a personal person, that's my beliefs. Obviously, over a certain age and regulated, because I think that some of the biggest issues from drugs are just it's not regulated, so it's not just coke, it's coke and fentanyl. You know what I mean? Obviously, you don't want that for any underage person but I think if you're an adult, you can make your own decisions. But whole different podcast. I really like that point, because I think that if somebody who is an individual who's just open to different experiences, like But I don't think a lot of people think of it that way. I think I think that message is less now, but it's still certainly a message that people remember.
And I think it also comes from the large majority of people who don't smoke weed, or don't see a benefit in it, from a recreational perspective. They want to kind of demonize it a little bit.
It also is a lot more mild in comparison, let's say, to cocaine. Like, smoking weed is not going to, it's going to produce an effect, but it's not going to produce the effect of so I think that maybe it was also an easier way to label it, because you're like, all right, there's effects, but they're more mild. But continuous use over time, especially for an adolescent brain, is going to create, and probably with working with a lot of the juveniles in the prison system, I would imagine that there was probably a lot of substance abuse patterns with those kids as well. Maybe not, but I would imagine that probably was also a contributing factor to not only their decisions, but also like their development.
100%.
I don't know what the stats are on that, but I would probably venture to say they're pretty high.
People who are traumatized tend to require self-medication.
True.
And so they turn to drugs and substances, and those substances help lead to worse decisions and bad behaviors. And, they create patterns and cycles for themselves it's difficult to get out of.
But that's where this can kind of go wrong, and that's what we wanted to talk about. So by using a compound maybe like THC, right, or alcohol, but we're going to stick to THC for this podcast, people might feel like they're coping with things, but they're really just covering it up.
Yes.
Is that what you would argue is probably the most
That's my biggest issue with it, is like most things, people aren't really dealing with the root cause, right? If somebody comes in to their doctor's office, you're an intelligent person, you can do this. You can walk right into your doctor's office and give them a highlight of a few talking points, and boom, get your prescription for medical marijuana. Great. You're going to take that prescription, you're going to go get it filled, and you're going to start smoking weed or edibles, whatever it is, whatever form you want to take with it. The issue that I have with it, and the issue that keeps popping up over and over and over again, is so you are going numb to whatever is causing the anxiety. So you're anxious, so you smoke weed, now you're relaxed, right? Guess what still exists? The anxiety. Whatever the cause is of the anxiety is there. You've temporarily numbed yourself to it, but you're not addressing what's actually causing the anxiety. You're not addressing your thoughts around it, the feelings or emotions around it, the behaviors that are surrounding it. You're not looking at the experiences, the people. Furthermore, and this is the key point, you're not developing the coping skills to manage stressful situations anymore, or anxiety, or any negative emotion. One of the goals of a parent is supposed to be to teach your children how to handle difficult situations that are unfair, situations that result in punishment, situations where a person is rejected or don't get the grades that they wanted and have to deal with disappointment and guilt and embarrassment and shame. Well, now what's happening is, instead of us developing these coping mechanisms to live a well-adjusted life, we're just smoking weed or popping an edible, and we're like, oh, I'm no longer anxious, or I've got bad anxiety. Well, no shit, you have bad anxiety. You've done nothing to actually address the things in your life that are causing it. And all you're doing is going numb to it. And so what I start to see is this pattern. Either people need to smoke in the morning before they do anything because their anxiety level is really high and they want that mellow to chill them out for the rest of the day. Or by the time they come home, they need a little bit of a hit. They need their edible, whatever it is, to mellow them out. And it becomes a habitual process. And more to the point, too, is a lot of the people that are seeking out medical marijuana or getting their green card or whatever it is are already people who enjoy smoking weed. Right? It's not like the glaucoma patient or the cancer patient. Don't get me wrong. They're out there. But by and large, the main people pushing for marijuana use and recreational use of it are people who already enjoy smoking it. Because most people who have anxiety, they're speaking to their doctors, and their doctors aren't necessarily prescribing it. But when you go to a doctor who has a propensity to prescribe it, you're going to kind of get what you want.
Or they're just prescribing other drugs, but that's a different conversation. So there's always I have a few points here. So first, do you think that we both agree, certainly, that if you are using this as a way to cope and not address the problem, then that's not beneficial. Do you think, or have you seen as a therapist, that there are times where things are just so absolutely so the person is so deep into their anxiety or whatever situation that maybe like, hey, using this for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever it is, might just get them past that point. And then, hey, let's have this conversation about tapering off or kind of using as necessary. Like, have you ever seen that to be helpful?
That's 100%. That's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up, because there's nothing wrong with that, especially if a person's like, look, I really don't want to take Xanax or clonazepam or something like that, and some other anti-anxiety drug, or I don't feel good with that. Pharmaceuticals have a lot of negative side effects. Like, is there something else that you can prescribe? Sure. And if that person's in intense or severe emotional distress or pain, where it's like they don't have the ability to be able to radically change their situation or their circumstances right now, but over time they can, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. It's when it's the opposite, right? It's when they don't deal with it and there's no other ancillary treatment that comes with it.
And that's really just speaks to where people's mindset is at. You know, I know people who smoke either daily or almost daily, or you know, ingest some type of THC almost daily, and it's not because they're avoiding the work that they need to do. It's because they have done all of that work and they continuously do that work, but they just really like it, and they'll admit that. They're like, I just really like how I feel with this. Whereas, and I do think that that's very different than somebody who is using it as a way to cope and is not still doing that work. It's kind of like drinking, right? Which obviously, again, there's a lot here, but like if you are reaching for a drink because you're like, I am so stressed and I don't want to deal with this and I just want to numb myself, that's very different, I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, that you're like, you know what, I really want this drink because this is going to be enjoyable and I really like this and I'm still doing all my other work. And maybe this does temporarily numb whatever I'm feeling because that's how alcohol works, but it doesn't mean that I'm doing this to avoid other stuff. So I think, right, like the potential use could look the same, but like the intent is very different. Do you see that people are able to regulate that way?
Well, yes and no. Like if you are the type of person who can drink or use drugs recreationally without it becoming a habitual process, then yes, they can use it sparingly. Or, you know, they can be the person who has the 30-day prescription and, you know, once or twice, you know, uses it throughout the week when there's a high stressful day. Okay.
Where do you see that go wrong, I guess?
I see it go wrong when I start to see it become more of a habit developing issue. And marijuana has habit forming components to it. THC is the psychotropic compound found in marijuana that provides the high. So where I see the problem with it becomes, and before I did this podcast, I reached out to 3 people that I know that have their green card or their medical marijuana card. 2 of them were clients. 1 of them was a friend. Okay. And the range that they were being prescribed is anywhere between 1 ounce to 2.5 ounces. 2.5 ounces was pretty much the highest amount that they could get. And to put this into perspective, and this was from one of my resources, they said like essentially they like to smoke blunts. And so they'll put about 1 gram of marijuana in a blunt. Okay. And so 1 gram or 1 ounce has about 28 grams of weed. So in 1 ounce, you're getting 28 blunts, okay, which is essentially 1 blunt a day for 30 days. If you have anything over 1 ounce, you're looking upwards of 2 to 2.5 blunts a day. So let me ask you, and here's the thing where you have to separate.
Damn, be high as fuck.
Right. You have to separate smoking marijuana from alcohol consumption. If I were to ask you or say to you that if I came home every day and had 1 alcoholic drink every single day, just one, would you see it as problematic?
I'm probably not the right person to ask.
Okay, so you say no. It's okay, say no.
I would honestly say that I feel like it would be the intent. If you were coming home and said, man, I really can't wait to get home and have that drink because I'm so stressed out and this is going to take my edge off, versus I'm coming home and I really enjoy this bottle of wine and I want to pour that glass. I don't know. To me, it feels very different because I've felt both things, but maybe that's my bias. But I would say that yes, 1 every day might be considered excessive for most people. I grew up a little differently, so maybe I'm not the best.
So let me ask you, would it change if I said I came home every day and I drank until I was drunk?
That's very different.
That's very different. Okay.
To me.
How do you differentiate? Now there's varying degrees of high, right? You just said, oh my God, 2.5 blunts a day, I'd be high as fuck, right? But 1 blunt gets you high. So you're intoxicated.
Well, it might not if you're...
You're right. It might not, but
not
by
me,
and large, it doesn't. One blunt doesn't get you high.
No, I'm saying it would for me, but I don't know about people who use a lot.
So my point becomes, at what point are you, now that you're smoking it every day or you're chewing it or ingesting it in some shape or form, your entire day now revolves around you on some level at some point requiring this substance in order to manage your day. Because what happens, take a person who's been smoking weed every single day for a couple of months. Everybody's like, it's not addictive. Bullshit. Take it away from them and watch what happens.
Oh yeah, the dependency is definitely there.
Right.
Honestly, I can't name a true substance that produces such a strong physiological effect, right? Like obviously some things kind of have a small effect, right? But I mean, any substance is going to be like that, right? Like caffeine, my other favorite substance. Like it's looked at as not as insidious because, it's just a few cups of coffee, or it's just an energy drink. It's just, waking you up. But if you look at how people consume caffeine in all different forms, you know what I mean? Most people would label that as an addiction. You know what I mean? Addiction. And there is a horrible withdrawal from caffeine when you take it away. But like that idea of when you said the reason I'm bringing that up is because when you said your day revolves around it, like everybody listening, y'all know, I can't wait to make my cup of coffee. I can't wait to crack that energy drink. I'm so excited for that pre-workout. Maybe I'm just speaking to my own issues, but like those are the things. But then you rationalize, well, at least it's not this. That's how I rationalize.
Sure. Yep.
It could be worse. It could be so much worse.
So you talk yourself into the habits that make sense.
And I think
that
for THC, at least currently, the narrative is that because it's natural, it's safe, and there's really no problems. And I think that's what you're trying to speak to is like, listen, using this occasionally, getting through a hard time, like all of that is super understandable and clinically could be really, really valid. However, at what point are you using this in a way that is circumventing working on those problems, creating those coping strategies? And I think that it can be hard, and that does get really blurry. And I think that it is super individualized because, like I said, I know people who are very much heavily into their personal development and working on themselves, but they just really like weed. They just do. You know what I mean? So it's like, I do think that there are potentially people who can do that. But I think that the conversation needs to stem around that first, kind of like any conversation with all this, right? Like, why are we just going right away to the, hey, here's a solution, you know what I mean? Or like, hey, use this to fix whatever. And it's like, yes, but also what else are we doing? Like, are we going for walks? Are we getting sun exposure? Are you sleeping? You know what I mean? Like, are you, how are you eating? Are you training regularly? Like, these are the conversations that aren't happening with any prescription. And it's just so frustrating. You know what I mean? Obviously, it's much more frustrating for you as a therapist to like know that there's so much that can be done that's just not even touched. You know what I mean? And it's not even like it has to be, I mean, obviously, ideally, it needs to be multiple sessions over probably multiple months. But even if it was a 30-minute conversation, you know what I mean? Hey, I'm going to write this script. Also, let's touch on the, like, how is this? And like leave with some like prompts for someone to think through and then some resources. Like, wouldn't that be so much better if you like this is a great business plan. You have like, hold on. You're getting your, your card or whatever, you're getting your script filled. And then instead of just, oh yeah, I need this, it's an actual conversation. And then, provided by potentially like a therapist, here are some talking points, here are some prompts, here's resources to follow up, and here's some contacts for people that you could reach out to. Like that, I think would change things so much. So any marijuana doctors who are listening, hit us up because I think that we have a great business plan.
Free samples, first of all.
Well,
Come on, send some of those.
I like edibles. I don't smoke. But I mean, every once in a while, but I don't like it. Anyways, I do think that would completely change this whole conversation, and I think that it's really misguided to just say because it's natural, it's okay. That's the same conversation with psilocybin. Psilocybin's natural. Has anybody ever done a huge dose of psilocybin and had a bad response? Fuck yes. You know what I mean? And to just say, what if that gets in the hands of somebody who's literally on the edge of potentially their psychotic break? It might be exactly what they need to push through that. Or now we know what happens. You know what I mean? And that's not to downplay the positive benefits of something like psilocybin, because there's tons of research on this and tons of personal anecdote, but it's about being responsible and saying, okay, how are you using this? What kind of headspace are you in before? What else are you doing around this? You can't just expect to take anything. And that's, I think, where your frustration is, right? As a therapist, is people are just, just take this and you'll feel better. And it's like, oh, really?
Well, people, what they recognize is too, they're coming in and they're smoking weed, or they're taking their medical marijuana, and then they're still coming in and being like, well, things in my life aren't working. There's still sources of anxiety. The relationships, the issues that are creating it are still there. And so we start working on coping mechanisms, and they have none because they've become dependent on it. So you can start from a space where I've got anxiety, I'm in therapy, and I start doing this. And so you start getting your medical marijuana and you start smoking it. It can very quickly, those tables can actually shift where it's like you stop doing the work that you need to do and you become reliant on the substance, which is habit forming, right? Which creates a dependency with it. And then you stop developing the coping mechanism to actually deal with or manage the anxiety. And then people are like, well, I just want to smoke marijuana, or I just want to get high, or I need this. But you're not actually addressing these other things. And so as a result, in some ways, it's weakening people's ability to manage and cope with life in healthier ways. And again, I'm not against it, but I am warning against it in the sense of it's a slippery slope, and it's very easy for it to become a habit. It's very easy for you to become dependent on this, and it's very easy for you to stop doing the work that you need to do because you're allowed to go numb to it. And so it's really weakening a person's resolve and their ability to cope. And I'm just giving that as the warning. That's been my experience with it. People are coming in and they're like, I've got anxiety and I smoke weed and I take weed, and it's like, okay, we're going to start from ground zero here and start working on your basic coping mechanisms. And they struggle with it because it's like, I don't know how to do these things anymore. I don't know how to have conflict resolution. I don't know how to sit with my anxiety. God forbid people sit with anxiety and feel it and actually resolve it now. Nowadays, as soon as somebody has a negative emotion, they want to numb it. They want to distract from it. They want to push it out of their life. They want to avoid it. They want to smoke. They want to pop a pill. And it's like, your mental health suffers if you don't give those negative emotions a part and a space to process and work through. It's always going to be there. So if you're 25, 26, 27, or 38, or 39, or 50, and you haven't been dealing with these things, and smoking weed is you're just pushing it down the road. It's not going anywhere. You're not actually dealing with it or developing the skills that are necessary. You're just going numb to it. And so I just wanted to bring awareness, I guess, to that aspect of it, to say, like, look, use it if you want to use it, but understand, like, and I think the other part of it that just kind of bothers me is there's the recreational users that make up and bullshit their way to get it just because they like to smoke it and enjoy it. And it's like, that bothers me a little bit, just, from a personal perspective, because it's like they're taking advantage of a system for people who fought really hard for this, who need it to help with their medical ailments and disorders. But, it is what it is. And
be careful. There are some people like myself who, if I have too much THC, I have horrible anxiety. I get so, like, it is panic inducing, and it's really bad. And that's not something that is. I mean, it's not the most common thing, but it's not super uncommon. Like, I'm certainly not the only person that I know who feels that way. So it might not also be that, like, silver bullet that you can just use to fix everything either, because too much and shit gets really weird. But I really like that point, and I appreciate that, because I think that, again, it speaks to this larger issue, which is why we try to talk about some of these other things that are working on these skills. You know what I mean? Like, why do we talk so much about, like, walks and journaling and meditating and all of this shit, and talking and writing out things? Like, because those are forcing you to sit with those emotions and actually process them and work through them. And honestly, I don't know if there's really a way to get to that place faster. Like, obviously there are certain things that people would argue, potentially, especially with psychedelics, you can make those breakthroughs faster, quicker, but even with that, you know what I mean? Like, you still have to, like, you're not avoiding that work. You know what I mean? I don't know anybody who has ever been able to get past that, you know what I mean, with using any substance or just doing anything or just avoiding it. Like, you have to address that. And that is the most uncomfortable thing in the entire world. Trust me, take it from me. Like, I would rather do anything besides sit with those types of emotions. But there is, like you said, it is going to catch up to you at some point. And the longer that you put it away, the harder it's going to come back.
I think sometimes it comes down to a simple question to ask yourself. Do you want to be the kind of person who can sit with really negative emotions and be uncomfortable and be in that space, but know eventually these things will move on? I can process my way through this and go through it. Or these negative emotions exist. I don't really want to deal with them, so I'd rather take something to kind of numb out the pain and not necessarily deal with it. Fine. It's your choice. It's your life. Just understand that until you're willing to confront these emotions and develop the skills necessary to deal with them, they're going to be present in your life. They're not going anywhere. And I think that's the part that people get frustrated with when they come into therapy, because they want, and it's a quick solution, right? Like, here's the problem. I give you a joint and immediately you feel better. Like within immediately after smoking it, you're good. Where if I'm like, go home and journal and sit with your emotions, like, oh my God, like that's hours, that's days, that's weeks.
That's months.
It's months, right? And so who wants to be uncomfortable like that? And so when I say, this isn't an easy thing, it's kind of like, it's not. And it's not supposed to be. Life isn't easy. Life is pain. Life is suffering in many ways. And this is the part where I just kind of feel like it speaks to a larger societal problem, is our inability to deal with difficult situations in healthier, natural ways. We're looking for this, like, let me just smoke, let me go numb, let me not deal with it, and kind of backdoor this in some way and expect it to be different. It's like, yeah, it's not. So just understand kind of the slippery slope that you're putting yourself on when you go down this path. I
think that's a perfect place to wrap that up. Do you want to?
No, I'm good. Else? We're good.
I think that pointed to a lot of really great things, and perfect segue. If you're interested in therapy and learning how to deal with these emotions, look at that. What is your email?
fullcircletherapyfl@gmail.com.
And we will put that in the show notes. And for any other inquiries, you can visit teamlocofit.com, and you can also download our app, the Redefine Healthy app. We'll link that below as well. We'll talk to you guys next week.